It seemed like a golden age of twattery. But Thatcher's luck couldn't last forever, and as the 1990s approached, she got too ambitious by unveiling the controversial poll tax, a tax on people called Paul, and they were furious. Following a wave of protests, Thatcher wound up on her iron arse, leaving Downing Street crying tears down her face, which she'd never done before in case it rusted. The next Prime Minister, Major John, was as fearsome as he looked, and he presided over yet another depressing period of recession. Britain was in a right state, not only financially, but also economically and in money terms too. The only hope was that we could somehow paint and sing our way out. It was an art and culture renaissance, an era defined by Oasis, the Spice Girls, Swede, Chris Evans, Take This, Damien Hirst, The Proddy Guy, Trainspotting, Chris Evans, Mr Blobby, Jamie Oliver, Mopeds, Ironic Wanking, The Italian Job, Chris Evans and Chris Evans. But one name sums up the 90s better than anyone else: Blur. In the 1997 election, why do you think more people voted for Tony Blair than Oasis?
You're making a mistake which was quite common at the time, that because the Prime Minister or Labour Party leader at the time was called Tony Blair.
Blur.
Blair.
Blur.
Blair.
Blur.
Tony Blair was
Blur.
Prime Minister and leader of the Labour Party, and there was one of the biggest rock or pop bands of the time was Blur. Blur.
Yeah. It's hard to remember today, but Blur and Blur were actually two different things. Blur were a rock band locked into a notorious rivalry with Oasis. Oasis were rough and tumble lads from Manchester, whereas Blur were from art school, which is the opposite of Manchester, and that's why they hated each other. Tony Blair, meanwhile, was a guitarist and Dee Ream fan who reinvented the Labour Party and rode it to victory at the election. Blur hosted a party at Number 10, inviting lots of the cool Britannia crowd and immediately making them much less cool. Anyone who was a massive prick was there, but the party atmosphere was interrupted by tragedy. Diana's death couldn't have come at a worse time for a nation that had just got really into being judgmental about her sex life. The sense of loss was shocking. It's hard to convey the atmosphere to younger viewers, although it's fair to say the general mood was... And also, Tony Blair stepped in to say what needed to be said. He called Diana the Peebles Princess.
She was the People's Princess.
Even though she wasn't from Peebles, she was from Norfolk. But sometimes the facts aren't as important as how something sounds. It was the first step on a post-pop career that turned the Prime Minister into a living saint, like Bono or Holly Willoughby.